My son said, "You needed a lesson, Mom," but that wasn't even the moment that broke me. What stayed with me, what kept replaying in my mind, was something he said earlier in a voice so calm it didn't feel real. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't look angry, he just stared down at the floor and said, "Mom, it's better if you don't come to the wedding." The words were quiet, almost careful, like he had practiced them. And somehow that made them hurt more. I felt something tighten in my chest, sharp and sudden, but I didn't let it show. I smiled the way mothers do when they're trying to protect their children from their own disappointment. I reached out, placed my hand gently over his and said, "Okay, sweetheart." My voice didn't shake, I made sure of that. But when he looked up at me, there was relief in his eyes, not regret, not hesitation, relief. And that was the part that stayed with me long after he left, because it meant this wasn't difficult for him, it was easier this way. The day of the wedding came, and just as he had asked, I wasn't there. No flowers arrived. No cake was delivered. Guests began to whisper, confused, checking their phones, looking around for answers that no one seemed to have. And me, I was exactly where he told me to be, nowhere. Sitting in my quiet house, surrounded by the same walls that had held every piece of my life together for years, I realized how strange it was to be erased from something that should have meant everything to me. Before all of that, my life had always been simple, not easy, but steady. I lived alone in the same small house where I raised my son, Eli. The floors creaked in familiar places, the kitchen window stuck every winter without fail, and the porch light flickered whenever the rain got too heavy. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every corner of that house carried memories, some good, some painful, but all of them real. I worked mornings at a grocery store and spent my evenings cleaning office buildings downtown. It was exhausting, yes, but it was honest work. I never complained, not even when my hands ached or when I came home too tired to eat, because everything I did for Eli. When he was a boy, I packed his lunches carefully, slipping small notes inside, nothing big, just little reminders that someone was thinking of him. I went to every school play, even the ones where he barely had a role or forgot his lines. I clapped the loudest anyway. When his father left, I didn't fill the house with anger. I didn't speak badly about him. I just held Eli a little closer and made sure he never felt like something was missing, even when it was. I believed that if I gave him enough love, enough stability, enough truth, he would grow into someone who understood what those things meant. Every Sunday evening, I called my sister June. It became a routine we never broke. She lived a few towns away, but she knew everything about my life just like I knew hers. When I told her Eli was getting married, her voice lit up immediately. "You must be so proud," she said, and I truly was. I thought it meant everything we had gone through had led to something good. Even our neighbor, Mr. Lawson, used to say, "You raised that boy right." He helped me fix things around the house when they broke, never asking for anything in return. I believed him when he said it. I held on to that belief more than I probably should have. Then Eli met Tessa. She was young, always perfectly dressed, polite in a way that felt practiced. Her family was different from ours, wealthy, confident, loud in ways that made it clear they were used to being listened to. Her father, Grant, was the kind of man who paid for everything without asking the price and spoke as if decisions naturally belonged to him. At first, I tried to be welcoming. I made space for her, asked questions, showed interest. And she responded kindly, but there was always something distant in it, something careful, like she was measuring every interaction. When I offered to help with the wedding, even in a small way, Eli smiled and said, "We've got it covered, Mom." He said it lightly, but that was the moment something shifted. After that, the conversations stopped, including me. I wasn't asked about dates, colors, or plans. Slowly, without any clear explanation, I was moved to the outside. At first, I told myself it was normal. Children grow up, they build their own lives. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who held on too tightly, who made things harder instead of easier, so I stepped back. I stayed quiet, I waited to be included again, but that moment never came. Eli stopped calling as often. And when he did, the conversations felt rushed, like he had somewhere else to be. If I asked about the wedding, he gave short answers. "It's going fine," he'd say, and then quickly change the subject. I told myself not to push. I told myself he was just busy. The first real crack came when I heard about the engagement party from someone else. June mentioned it casually during one of our Sunday calls. She assumed I had been there. When she realized I hadn't, her tone changed slightly. "Oh, I thought you knew," she said. I told her I couldn't make it. The lie came out easily, but it stayed with me long after the call ended. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, trying to understand how something so important had happened without me even knowing. A week later, I ran into Mr. Lawson while checking my mail. He smiled the way he always did, but there was something different behind it this time. "How are you holding up?" he asked. I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Eli said you weren't feeling well. That's why you haven't been around." The words hit harder than I expected. I forced a small laugh. "I'm fine," I said, but inside something shifted. That night I called Eli. I asked him directly why people thought I was sick. There was a pause on the line long enough to feel wrong. Then he said, "I didn't say that." His voice sounded tight, controlled. I wanted to believe him, so I let it go, but something didn't sit right after that. As the wedding got closer, the stories spread. June heard from someone at church that I had become unstable. Another neighbor asked if I had moved away. Each time I smiled and corrected them, but inside the confusion grew into something heavier. I started to wonder what version of me was being shared when I wasn't there to defend myself. One evening, Eli showed up at my house without calling first. That alone was unusual. He stood in the kitchen but didn't take off his jacket. He didn't sit down. His eyes kept drifting toward the clock like he didn't want to stay long. I offered him coffee. He shook his head, and that's when I knew something was coming. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." I didn't interrupt. I just waited, and deep down, without knowing exactly why, I felt that whatever he was about to say was going to change everything. "Mom," he said again, like he needed to steady himself, "it would be better if you didn't come to the wedding." For a moment, I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I was waiting for the rest of the sentence, the explanation, the reason, something that would make those words feel less final, but nothing came. He just stood there, hands rubbing together, eyes avoiding mine. "Better for who?" I asked quietly. He exhaled, shifting his weight like the question made him uncomfortable. "It's complicated." That word again, complicated. It hung in the air like something meant to close the conversation instead of open it. "Then explain it to me," I said. He hesitated. I could see the struggle on his face, but it wasn't the kind that comes from wanting to tell the truth. It was the kind that comes from trying to hold something back. "Tessa's family," he finally said, "they wouldn't understand." "Understand what?" I asked, my voice steady, even though something inside me had already started to sink. He didn't answer right away. His silence stretched longer than it should have, and in that silence I felt the truth forming before he even said it. "Me?" I asked. He looked away. That was enough. "I just want everything to go smoothly," he added quickly, like he was trying to fix the damage. "I don't want any tension. It's an important day." "And I create tension?" I asked. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. But sometimes silence speaks louder than either. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to him. "I see." He stepped closer then, his voice softer. "It's just for one day, Mom. After that, everything will go back to normal. Normal." I almost laughed at that, but the sound never came out, because something inside me already knew nothing was going back to normal after this. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. The house felt quieter than usual, like even the familiar sounds had pulled back. I didn't cry right away. That came later, slowly, quietly, without any drama, just tears that fell while I sat there, thinking about all the years that had led to this moment. I thought about the nights I stayed up worrying about him, the choices I made to keep his life steady when mine felt uncertain. I thought about how I had never once asked for anything in return. And now, somehow, I had become something that needed to be hidden. A few days later, June came by. She didn't bother with small talk. The moment she walked in, she looked at me carefully and said, "Something's wrong." I tried to brush it off at first, but she's known me too long for that. It didn't take much before everything came out. I told her what Eli had said, how he wanted me to stay away, how things had been changing for months. Her expression shifted from concern to something sharper. "This isn't right," she said firmly. Before I could respond, she added, "And that's not even the worst part." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated for a second, then said, "I heard something the other day at a restaurant. Grant was there talking to someone." I felt my chest go still. "What did he say?" I asked. June looked at me carefully, like she was deciding how much to tell me. He said your mother isn't in the picture, she said slowly. The words didn't register at first. He laughed when he said it, she continued. Like it wasn't a big deal. My hands started to shake slightly, resting against the edge of the table. June, I said, but I didn't even know what I was about to ask. That's not all, she added quietly. Someone asked more questions and he said you had issues, that you weren't stable. That it was better this way. The room felt smaller suddenly, not physically, but in a way that made it hard to breathe. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every strange moment, every small thing I had ignored. And for the first time, the pieces didn't feel separate anymore. They started to connect. The distance, the short phone calls, the engagement party I wasn't invited to, the stories spreading about me, it wasn't accidental. It wasn't misunderstanding, it was deliberate. By morning, something inside me had changed. The hurt was still there, but it wasn't as scattered as before. It had settled into something clearer, something sharper. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a kind of focus I hadn't felt in weeks. I wasn't going to guess anymore. I needed to know. I went through my old papers until I found a small list Eli had mentioned months ago, vendors for the wedding. At the time, it hadn't seemed important. Now it felt like the only place left to look. My hands were steady as I picked up the phone. The florist answered first. I gave my name. There was a pause, then she said, "Oh, yes. You're listed as the main contact." I froze. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked. "All the arrangements are under your name," she explained. "We've been waiting for your confirmation." My heart started pounding. I thanked her, hung up, and immediately called the baker. Same response. Then the venue, again, everything, every single detail was under my name. I sat there in silence, the phone still in my hand as the truth settled in fully. I wasn't just being left out, I had been replaced. Turned into a story that made things easier for them while I remained the invisible foundation holding everything together. That was the moment something inside me stopped breaking and started becoming still. Not numb, not empty. Just clear, because now I understood, and once you understand something like that, you can't go back to pretending. I sat there for a long time, staring at the list in front of me, realizing that I had a choice. I could call Eli. I could demand answers, ask him to fix it, try to pull everything back together the way I always had. Or I could finally stop doing that. I could accept what he had already chosen and respond in a way that didn't require me to disappear. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to protect him from consequences. Instead, I reached for the phone again, and this time I made a different decision. I held the phone in my hand for a long moment before dialing, staring at the list of vendors like it belonged to someone else's life. For years, every decision I made had been about keeping things together, smoothing over cracks before they became visible. But this time, the cracks weren't mine to fix. So instead of calling Eli, I called each vendor back. My voice was calm, steady in a way that surprised even me. I confirmed every booking, every arrangement, every detail. I asked questions, clarified timelines, made small adjustments where needed. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted to understand exactly what had been built around my absence. By the time I finished, one thing was clear. Everything about that wedding depended on me except my presence. That realization didn't break me the way it might have before. Instead, it settled into something quieter, something stronger. For the first time, I wasn't reacting, I was deciding. The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange kind of stillness. The house felt the same as it always had, the same soft creak in the hallway, the same light filtering through the kitchen window, but I felt different moving through it. Slower, more aware, like I was stepping into something I had already accepted. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down, letting the silence stretch around me. There was no rush, no last-minute panic, no phone calls asking for help, just quiet. For a moment, I thought about staying exactly where I was. After all, that's what Eli had asked for, but then I remembered the florist's voice, the baker, the venue coordinator, the way they had all spoken to me like I mattered, like I was still part of something real. And I realized something important. I hadn't been removed, I had been erased. There's a difference. One is an absence, the other is a lie. I stood up, set the empty cup in the sink, and made my decision. When I arrived at the venue, the place was already alive with movement. Guests were dressed in their best, laughter filling the air, music drifting softly in the background. Everything looked exactly as it should, perfect, polished, carefully arranged. For a moment, I stayed near the entrance, watching. No one noticed me at first, and that told me everything. I walked inside slowly, taking in the details I had unknowingly helped create. The flowers were arranged just the way I would have chosen them. The colors matched perfectly. Even the small decorations on the tables felt familiar, like pieces of my own taste placed into a world I hadn't been invited to. It was strange seeing yourself reflected in something you weren't supposed to exist in. Then someone turned. A woman I didn't recognize looked at me, her expression polite but uncertain. "Can I help you?" she asked. I met her gaze calmly. "I believe everything here was arranged under my name." There was a pause, confusion flickered across her face, followed by realization. Before she could respond, I saw him, Eli. He was standing across the room mid-conversation, but his eyes had already found me. The moment he saw me, everything about him changed. The relaxed posture disappeared. His shoulders stiffened, his expression tightening in a way I had never seen before. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he started walking toward me, fast. "Mom," he said under his breath as he reached me, his voice sharp with urgency. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, really looked at him, trying to understand how the boy I raised had become someone I didn't recognize. "I came to see the wedding," I said simply. His jaw tightened. "I told you not to come." "Yes," I replied quietly. "You did." There was a flicker of something in his eyes, frustration, maybe even fear, but it passed quickly. "This isn't the place for this," he said, glancing around. "You're right," I said. "It's not." That seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, he didn't know what to say, and that's when I noticed something else. People were starting to look, not openly, not yet, but enough to feel it. The shift in attention, the subtle awareness that something wasn't quite right. Eli noticed it too. "Let's step outside," he said quickly. I shook my head. "No," I said, still calm. "I don't think I will." The words landed heavier than I expected. For a second, he just stared at me like he was waiting for me to take them back. But I didn't. "Do they know?" I asked quietly. His expression hardened. "Know what?" "That I'm the reason this wedding exists at all," I said. Silence, not just between us, but around us, because now people were listening. "Mom, stop," he said, his voice low, warning, but I didn't raise mine. "I didn't need to. I spoke to the vendors," I continued, just loud enough to carry. "Everything is under my name, every detail, every payment." A ripple moved through the small crowd that had formed nearby. Eli's face went pale. "This isn't the time," he said. "No," I agreed softly. "It's not, but it's the truth." For a moment, it looked like he might argue, might deny it, might try to push everything back into silence. But he didn't, because he couldn't. And deep down, we both knew that. I took a step back then, creating space not just physically, but emotionally. The kind of space that had been missing for a long time. "I'm not here to ruin anything," I said. "I'm here because I deserve to exist in the story you've been telling about me." He didn't respond, not this time, and that told me more than any words could have. I looked around one last time, the decorations, the guests, the life that had been built while I was being written out of it. And then I turned to leave. No shouting, no scene, just a quiet ending to something that had already been broken long before this day. As I walked away, I didn't feel the weight I expected. There was no anger, no overwhelming sadness. Just a strange, steady calm, because for the first time I hadn't stayed silent to keep the peace. I hadn't disappeared to make things easier. I had simply told the truth and let it stand on its own. And as I stepped outside into the open air, I realized something I hadn't understood before. Sometimes the lesson isn't the one they try to teach you. Sometimes it's the one you finally choose to learn for yourself.